The biting wind of New York blew at 5°, lashing against the double-glazed windows of Helen Sterling's minimalist penthouse on the Upper East Side. The silence inside the $80 million residence was absolute, broken only by the clink of ice in the crystal glass she held with cold fingers. Helen gazed at the city below, a tapestry of distant lights and anonymous lives, feeling the familiar weight of a loneliness that no Forbes cover or corporate success could ever fill. The environment, decorated with abstract art and polished steel, felt more like an ice gallery than a home, perfectly reflecting the numbed state of her soul after years of running from the memory of the daughter fate had taken from her in a public hospital. Outside, reality was brutal and unfiltered, with the harsh winter punishing those society had systematically chosen to ignore. Leaving the charity gala, wrapped in a fur coat worth more than the lives of many present, Helen walked toward her armored car, her heels clicking sharply against the frozen asphalt. It was at that moment that a small figure, far too small for such devastating cold, emerged between the security guards trying to keep the perimeter sealed. Maya Rodriguez, an 8-year-old girl with eyes that carried a weary wisdom, did not extend her hand to beg for coins, but instead held a crumpled piece of paper with an urgency that froze the mechanical movements of the powerful CEO. The orange glow of the streetlights highlighted the cruel, contrast between Helen's silk dress and the child's worn, inadequate coat. Maya extended the drawing, a simple depiction of a woman surrounded by an aura of light, holding hands with a small child, a sketch overflowing with an almost painful hope to witness. Helen felt a tight knot in her throat, something she had not experienced in decades, a crack in the armor of absolute control she had built so carefully. The girl looked directly into her eyes, without the fear that Sterling skincare employees usually showed, and handed over the paper with a reverence that felt out of place on that hostile, icy Manhattan sidewalk. "You look exactly like the woman who appeared in my dream, surrounded by light and with hands full of care," Maya said, her voice hoarse from the cold, yet firm like an unexpected prophecy. The world around Helen seemed to slow as her eyes locked onto a small but devastatingly familiar detail. Hanging from Maya's neck was a silver pendant with a unique engraving, identical to the one her daughter wore on the night everything went dark. That symbolic object, rescued from the trash of a hospital years earlier, acted like a master key, unlocking doors Helen had sworn to keep closed forever and changing the course of her life in a single second of recognition. Subscribe now so you don't miss the unfolding of this emotional story, and comment below which city or country you're watching from so we can get to know you better. Helen remained frozen on the sidewalk, feeling the icy air burn her lungs as the distant flashes of photographers seemed to lose their brightness in the face of that small revelation. The pendant, a small silver locket engraved with a daisy, swayed gently against Maya's chest, bringing back the sharp scent of antiseptic and the despair of the New York Public Hospital where Helen lost her only daughter, Sarah, 10 years earlier. Back then, she was not the powerful CEO everyone knew, but a young, terrified mother who watched her life collapse in a poorly lit corridor without the means to change fate. Sarah's loss turned Helen into a woman of iron, focused on building a beauty empire that served as a barrier between her and any form of vulnerability or real pain. Maya, unaware of the inner storm raging within the woman before her, explained that she lived in a temporary shelter in the Bronx, a place on the verge of closing due to a lack of government funding and donations. She shared that she spent her days drawing on discarded scraps of paper using broken pencils she found, hoping to sell her small artworks for a few cents to buy a gift for the social worker who protected her. The girl spoke with a purity that contrasted sharply with the harshness of her reality, describing how she had found the silver pendant in a hospital trash bin when she was even younger, treating it as a protective talisman. To Helen, every word was a blow to her cynical armor, revealing an inexplicable connection between the past she tried to bury and the present, now confronting her. Helen's silence was interpreted as hesitation by the security guards, who attempted to intervene and move Maya away. But the CEO raised her hand in an authoritative gesture that silenced everyone around them. She ignored security protocol, the luxury cars waiting with engines running, and the pressure of her packed schedule for the next day, allowing her knees to touch the cold pavement. Meeting Maya at eye level, Helen noticed the girl's dry skin and the constant shiver in her body from the low temperature, feeling a wave of empathy she had long believed to be dead. The luxury of her life, her designer clothes and immaculate penthouse, suddenly felt empty and insignificant compared to the resilient dignity of that orphaned child who was simply searching for connection. Inside the armored car, on the way to an exclusive restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, the dialogue between them revealed emotional chasms and unexpected bridges of affection. Helen asked about Maya's parents, learning that they were immigrants who had died in a workplace accident, leaving the girl alone in an overburdened and impersonal foster care system. Maya, in turn, asked why a woman so beautiful and powerful seemed to carry so much sadness in her eyes. A question Helen could not immediately answer, choosing instead to look away at the lights of Broadway. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing minute, grounded in shared loss and the deeply human. Need to be seen and recognized by someone amid the crowd. Upon arriving at the restaurant, an establishment frequented by New York's financial elite, Maya's entrance caused immediate murmurs among the patrons and the manager, who hesitated to allow a child in such simple clothing inside. Helen Sterling, however, left no room for debate, using her status and influence to ensure Maya received the best possible treatment, seating them at the most visible table in the dining room. As the girl gazed in, wonder at the silverware and the extensive menu, Helen watched the outside world begin to react, with people filming the unusual scene and posting it on social media. The social tension was palpable, but Helen was focused solely on watching Maya eat her first truly warm meal in many days, feeling a spark of purpose ignite within her. In the days that followed, Helen plunged headfirst into the bureaucracy of the American adoption system, facing resistance from her own lawyers and the board of directors of her company. The executives at Sterling Skincare feared that associating the brand with a shelter child and Helen's public exposure would damage its carefully crafted image of sophistication and control. Tense meetings followed, where they suggested Helen simply make a generous donation and step away. But the CEO felt that her soul was at stake in that decision. The external conflict escalated as sensationalist media exploited the story, questioning Helen's intentions and digging. into Maya's past, creating an atmosphere of constant pressure and harsh criticism. Internally, Helen battled a paralyzing fear of becoming attached again and facing the possibility of another devastating loss in her personal life. She found herself staring at photos of her daughter, Sarah, overwhelmed by guilt, as if she were trying to replace the irreplaceable through a child from a shelter. The solitude of her penthouse now felt even more oppressive, as every empty corner reminded her of the absence of a child's laughter and the weight of a responsibility she was no longer sure she could bear. Yet her daily visits to the temporary shelter, watching Maya draw on her narrow bed, became the only moments of the day when Helen felt truly alive and connected. The bureaucratic obstacles were immense. Documentation requirements, home inspections, and the interference of a distant relative of Maya who suddenly appeared, interested in a potential financial settlement. This uncle, who had never cared about his niece before, attempted to extort Helen, demanding a substantial sum in exchange for not contesting the legal guardianship process in court. Helen realized the system was designed to discourage affection, prioritizing cold rules and financial interests over the emotional well-being of a vulnerable child. She had to use all of her business acumen and financial resources to fight manipulation attempts, protecting Maya from being used as a pawn in a game of greed. As the legal battle continued, the bond between the two deepened through simple gestures, such as Helen teaching Maya how to use the new paints and brushes she had bought for her. One rainy afternoon at the shelter, Maya confessed that she was afraid Helen would grow tired of her and return her to the system, as other potential adopters had done in the past. Helen held the girl's small hands, feeling the fragility of her bones and the strength of her hope, and promised she would never leave her alone. No matter what happened. It was in that moment that Helen's emotional barrier finally collapsed, allowing the tears she had suppressed for 10 years to flow freely down her face. The tension reached its peak when the company's board of directors issued Helen an ultimatum. Either she stepped away from the media attention surrounding the adoption to focus on a multi-billion-dollar merger with a European conglomerate, or she would be removed from her position as CEO. They claimed her emotional instability was affecting stock value and investor confidence in the global market. Helen found herself at a brutal crossroads, forced to choose between the empire she had built with a lifetime of sweat and the promise of love she had made to an orphaned child. Every call from her lawyers brought new threats and pressure, testing the limits of her resilience and the truth behind her deepest motivations. Maya's health, already weakened by life on the streets and the precarious conditions of the shelter before it closed, began to show alarming signs of rapid deterioration. A persistent cough turned into a high fever, and the girl was diagnosed with severe pneumonia that required immediate admission to an intensive care unit. Helen spent sleepless nights at the hospital, the very same hospital where Sarah had died, confronting the ghosts of her past while holding Maya's hand amid tubes and monitors. The contrast between Helen's wealth, capable of paying for the best doctors in the world, and the fragility of human life became the center of her existence in that critical moment. At the peak of Maya's health crisis, the day of the final signing of the multi-billion-dollar merger arrived, requiring Helen's physical presence in London to close the deal that would define her career. The private jet was ready, executives were waiting, and millions of dollars in bonuses depended on her in-person signature on that historic contract. Meanwhile, in the hospital room in New York, Maya squeezed Helen's hand in a moment of semi-consciousness, whispering that she was afraid of waking up and not finding her there. Helen Sterling, the woman who had always placed control and beauty above everything, looked at the phone ringing incessantly and at the girl fighting for her life, feeling the crushing weight of a life-altering decision. On the 10th floor of the hospital, the rhythmic, impersonal sound of heart monitors was the only soundtrack to Helen's final conflict. The phone in her hand vibrated non-stop with urgent messages from London, where the company's board and international investors awaited her for the signature that would cement her global power. On the other side of the ICU's glass enclosure, Maya fought against pneumonia, her small breaths assisted by machines, the only thing that truly mattered to Helen in that instant. The CEO glanced at the digital contract on her tablet, a document representing billions of dollars, and then at Maya's small hand, still. Clutching tightly the silver pendant that once belonged to her deceased daughter. Helen's decision was made not with the cold logic of an executive, but with the courage of a mother who refused to fail a second time. She turned off her phone, deliberately ignoring the merger that would define her career, and walked to Maya's bedside, disregarding strict sanitation protocols simply to be present. The hospital's silence, once a trigger of trauma, became the stage for her personal redemption as she watched the small figure fight for every breath. In that moment, the financial loss of millions of dollars and the likely removal from her position seemed a small price to pay for the chance not to let a child leave this world alone in the darkness. When Maya briefly opened her eyes, blurred by fever and exhaustion, she found Helen's face bathed in tears and wearing a peaceful smile the CEO had never shown to the cameras. "I thought you had gone to sign those important papers the men in suits talked about," the girl whispered, her voice almost inaudible beneath the oxygen mask. Helen gently held the child's face between her hands, feeling the heat of the fever beginning to subside, and said, "There is nothing more important in the entire world than being here with you, Maya. Papers can be redone, companies can be rebuilt, but the time I lost being unable to love someone is the only thing I can never get back." The dialogue between them sealed a bond that transcended any legal. Adoption document, transforming Helen's chronic pain into renewed purpose. She confessed to Maya about her daughter, Sarah, explaining how the pendant around the girl's neck had been the sign that life was giving her a second chance to be light in someone else's life. "I spent years trying to save my image, building a beauty empire to hide how ugly I felt inside because of my guilt," Helen admitted in a raw confession. Maya, with the wisdom that only suffering can teach, touched Helen's emotional wound and replied that real beauty was what they were building together in that hospital room. The impact of Helen's choice was felt immediately in the financial markets, with Sterling skincare shares suffering a historic drop after news broke that the CEO had missed the merger for personal reasons. Yet while newspapers spoke of professional suicide, Helen felt an indescribable sense of freedom as she signed the final adoption papers right there in the uncomfortable chair of the ICU. The true climax was not a victory in a boardroom, but the moment Maya's heart rate stabilized and doctors confirmed that the risk of death had passed. Helen had not only saved an orphan's life, she had allowed that child to save what remained of her own humanity, choosing love over profit. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. The resolution of the story materialized in concrete changes that transformed not only Helen and Maya's lives, but also the social structure around them. Months after the hospital crisis, the adoption was formally finalized, and Helen used her influence and part of her personal fortune to found the Sterling Rodriguez Foundation, an organization dedicated to reforming shelters and accelerating adoption processes throughout New York. Maya's former shelter, once destined to close, was completely rebuilt and transformed into a state-of-the-art arts and care center, ensuring that no child would ever again have to sell drawings in the snow to feel valued. Helen stepped down as CEO of the global corporation to become president of the foundation, trading gala events for meetings with social workers and lawmakers in pursuit of real systemic change. The change in their daily lives was visible in every detail of the Upper East Side penthouse, which lost its cold, minimalist aesthetic and gave way to an explosion of color and life. The glass walls, once empty, were now filled with Maya's drawings, and the oppressive silence was replaced by laughter and piano lessons echoing through the steel and marble corridors. Helen's refrigerator, once stocked only with mineral water and luxury products, was now covered with magnets, notes, and school reminders, symbolizing the transformation of a mausoleum of luxury into a true home. Helen learned that true elegance was not found in the absence of imperfections, but in constant presence and devoted care for those we love, rediscovering joy in simple things like making breakfast. Helen's reconciliation with her own past finally allowed her to visit her daughter Sarah's grave, bringing Maya with her as a gesture of closure and continuity. Together, they placed flowers and the original drawing Maya had given Helen on that fateful night on the frozen sidewalk, symbolically uniting the two children who had defined the protagonist's emotional journey. The pain Helen had carried for a decade did not disappear completely, but it transformed into a driving force for good, allowing her to speak about her loss without the paralyzing weight of guilt that once held her captive. The foundation began offering psychological support to parents who had lost children and to grieving children, creating a network of human solidarity that surpassed any financial value Helen had ever accumulated in her former career. The conclusion of this journey presents a hopeful vision, reinforcing the moral that love and human connection are the only assets that truly appreciate over time. Helen Sterling, once the most powerful woman in the beauty industry, found her greatest fulfillment in being called mother by a girl the world had forgotten to see. The story proves that it is never too late to change the course of a life, as long as one has the courage to stop and pay attention to the suffering of others, transforming pain into purpose. The future now opened before them not as a succession of corporate goals to be conquered, but as a series of precious moments to be lived, proving that a human being's greatest wealth is the capacity to give of oneself and to begin again from nothing. 10 years later, The auditorium of a prestigious arts university in New York was filled to capacity for the graduation ceremony of the visual arts class. Maya Rodriguez, now a radiant young woman and an award-winning artist, walked onto the stage to receive her diploma with honors before an emotional audience. In her valedictory speech, she did not speak. About technique or art theory, but about the importance of being seen by someone when the world feels dark. She held tightly the silver pendant that had become part of her identity, looking directly toward the front row, where a visibly older Helen Sterling, eyes shining with pride, rose to her feet in applause. This award, and every brushstroke I have ever made, belongs to the woman who had the courage to stop her armored car and her multi-billion-dollar empire to see an invisible girl in the... Snow, Maya declared, her voice breaking with gratitude. She taught me that art is not only on paper, but in the act of rescuing someone's hope. The camera cuts to Helen, who smiles back, showing the laugh lines of someone who has laughed deeply over the years and the serenity of someone who knows she made the right choice. The cycle of pain was broken and transformed into a legacy of love, now passed on through the colors and actions of a new generation, proving that the impact of a single act of kindness echoes into eternity. Have you ever done an act of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Comment, "Love has no price," if you also believe in human kindness. Subscribe for more stories of second chances.